"Bear me an heir and your debt is forgiven," the Duke said, but one night bound his heart forever. The storm raged against the windows of Thornfield Manor, each thunderclap punctuating the silence that hung between Lady Selene Harrow and the infamous Duke of Ravencrest. Rain cascaded down the glass panes like tears, while candlelight cast long shadows across the imposing study. The contract lay unfurled upon the mahogany desk, its black ink gleaming with cruel promise. "Bear me an heir and your debt is forgiven," the Duke said, his voice cutting through the chamber like a steel blade. His face, half illuminated by firelight, revealed nothing of the man beneath the title. "Your father's debts will be erased, your brother's future secured, and your family name preserved." Lady Selene's fingers trembled around the delicate porcelain teacup. She placed it upon its saucer with deliberate care, refusing to betray the tempest within her breast. The tongue had whispered of the Duke's ruthlessness, how he had built his fortune from the ruins of lesser men, yet nothing had prepared her for the cold calculation in his grey eyes. "You speak of a child as though it were merely a transaction, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm in her heart. "Is there nothing sacred in your world?" The Duke's mouth curved into what might have been mistaken for a smile had it reached his eyes. "Sanctity is a luxury, Lady Harrow, one your family forfeited when your father gambled away your dowry and your brother's inheritance." He lifted a silver letter opener, turning it between his gloved fingers. "I offer salvation, not sentiment." A hush fell across the chamber. The assembled servants stilled like statues, breath held in collective anticipation. The housekeeper's knuckles whitened around her ring of keys, while the butler's eyes fixed upon the carpet's intricate pattern. Lady Selene rose, her spine straight as a cavalry officer's sword. "And if I refuse your generous offer?" "Then Thornfield Hall shall be sold within the fortnight," he replied, not bothering to look up from the contract. "Your brother will lose his medicine, your cousins their shelter, and you, Lady Harrow, will discover how quickly the tongue forgets a fallen name." The clock ticked mercilessly, each moment sealing her fate more firmly than the last. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the gardens where she had played as a child during visits to this estate, before death and debt had ravaged her family's fortune. "One night," the Duke continued, sliding the contract toward her with a single gloved finger. "One heir, a small price for your family's redemption." The quill rested beside the parchment, its silver nib catching the firelight like a tear. Lady Selene reached for it with fingers that no longer trembled. "Let it be known, Your Grace, that I sign not for love nor for duty to you, but for those who depend upon me," she declared. "May God judge between us when this contract is fulfilled." The Duke's face remained impassive. "God has little interest in business matters, Lady Harrow." "Then may he have mercy upon your soul," she whispered, "for I shall have none." The quill scratched against parchment, each stroke binding her to a future she had never imagined. The servant's eyes lowered in silent witness, while thunder rolled across the hills like judgment deferred. When she finished, the Duke rose from his chair. Standing at his full height, he towered above her like a monument to privilege. "The arrangement commences tonight. You will be shown to your chambers." "So soon?" Lady Selene's voice faltered for the first time. "Surely some preparation—" "Time is a commodity I value above all else," he interrupted. "Your brother's medicine arrives tomorrow, contingent upon our agreement. Your family's debts vanish with the morning post, if our terms are met tonight." A gasp travelled through the gallery of servants. Lady Selene felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, yet she lifted her chin defiantly. "Very well, Your Grace. Let this night be remembered as the moment you purchased not only my body, but the contempt I shall hold for you until my dying breath." For a moment, brief as a heartbeat, something flickered across the Duke's stern features. Not regret, perhaps, but recognition. Then it vanished, replaced by the cool mask of nobility. "Your chambers await, Lady Harrow, the east wing where the roses once grew." He turned toward the window. "Your contempt is not part of our agreement, though you may keep it if it provides comfort." Hours later, Lady Selene stood in the cavernous bedchamber, wrapped in a nightgown of ivory silk that seemed both shield and surrender. The storm had subsided to a gentle rainfall, tapping against the window panes like hesitant fingertips. A fire blazed in the hearth, yet could not dispel the chill within her bones. The knock at the door came precisely at midnight. 3 soft raps that sealed her fate. The Duke entered without waiting for permission, dressed in a dressing gown of midnight blue. Without his tailored finery, he appeared almost human, a realization that disturbed her more than his earlier coldness. "Lady Harrow," he began, his voice unexpectedly soft. "Your Grace," she replied, forcing herself to meet his gaze, "let us not pretend this night holds any tenderness. The contract awaits fulfillment." He approached slowly, as one might approach a wounded animal. When he stood before her, she noticed the slight tremor in his hand as he reached toward her face. "The contract," he murmured. "Yes." His fingers hovered near her cheek but did not touch her. In the firelight, his eyes were no longer grey, but almost blue, like the sky after a storm. "I will not be gentle with your pride," he said, "but I need not be cruel to your person." Lady Selene swallowed the knot in her throat. "Then let us proceed, Your Grace. Dawn comes quickly, and with it your heir and my freedom." The Duke nodded once, then extinguished the lamp beside the bed. In darkness his fingers found hers, and in that touch, unexpected, almost reverent, lay the first crack in the foundation of their bitter contract. Morning arrived with the pallid light of early spring, filtering through the heavy damask curtains of the East Wing chamber. Lady Selene awoke alone, the emptiness beside her as profound as the hollow ache in her chest. The contract had been fulfilled, a clinical union of bodies without the sanctity of love. Yet something in the Duke's touch had belied his earlier coldness. She rose from the bed, her reflection in the ornate mirror, a stranger's face. The woman who stared back had eyes older than they had been yesterday. The silver hairbrush on the vanity trembled in her grasp, as memories of the night filtered through her consciousness, the unexpected gentleness in his hands, the whispered apology she was certain she had imagined. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, entered with a tray of tea and correspondence. "His Grace has departed for London, my lady," the older woman stated, her eyes carefully avoiding Celine's. "He left instructions that you are to be given every comfort during his absence." "How considerate," Celine replied, the bitterness in her voice unmistakable. "And when might we expect His Grace's return?" "A fortnight, perhaps longer." Mrs. Winters placed the tray upon the small writing desk by the window. "There is a letter for you, my lady." The envelope bore the Duke's seal, a raven in flight, wings outstretched against a field of stars. Celine broke the wax with unsteady fingers. "Lady Harrow, our contract has been honoured. Your family's debts are forgiven as promised. The estate at Willow Creek remains in your family's possession, and your brother's treatment shall continue indefinitely under my physician's care. Thornfield Manor is yours to call home until such time as we confirm the fulfillment of our arrangement. Mrs. Winters has been instructed to accommodate your every need. Should our agreement bear fruit, further instructions shall follow. Ravencrest." No signature, no warmth, merely the cold efficiency of business concluded. Celine crumpled the letter in her fist, then smoothed it flat again. What had she expected? Certainly not sentiment from a man who had purchased her dignity with such calculated precision. "Is there a reply, my lady?" Mrs. Winters inquired. "No," Celine answered. "None that would be proper to commit to paper." The following weeks passed with excruciating slowness. Celine wandered the vast halls of Thornfield, a ghost in a house of memories not her own. The servants treated her with distant respect, a courtesy extended to valuable property rather than the lady of the house. It was in the library, 3 weeks after that fateful night, that Celine first suspected the contract had borne its intended consequence. The morning sickness came without warning, forcing her to abandon her book and rush to the nearest basin. Mrs. Winters found her there, pale and trembling, and summoned the physician without being asked. "A child grows within you, Lady Harrow," the doctor confirmed later that afternoon. "I would estimate 6 to 7 weeks hence." Celine stared at the delicate porcelain figurine on the mantelpiece, a shepherdess forever frozen in a moment of repose. "You will inform His Grace?" she asked, though it was scarcely a question. "It is my duty," the physician replied with a bow. "He will be most pleased." "Yes," she whispered, the contract fulfilled. That evening, as twilight shrouded the gardens in violet shadows, Celine penned a letter of her own. The silver quill, the same that had signed away her freedom, now recorded her intent. "Your Grace, your heir grows within me as our contract demanded. My obligation shall be fulfilled in 7 months' time. Beyond that, I request my freedom and a modest stipend for my future. I have no desire to remain at Thornfield once my duty is complete. Motherhood imposed by contract is a burden I shall bear, but wifehood to a man who sees children as commerce is more than I can countenance. Lady Celine Harrow." The letter dispatched, Celine retreated to the East Wing, where the roses that once climbed the trellis had long since withered and died. Like her, they had been beautiful things sacrificed to necessity, 3 days later, the Duke's carriage thundered up the gravel drive, arriving in a flurry of mud and urgency that sent the household into disarray. Celine watched from the window as he descended, taller and more forbidding than memory had painted him. His greatcoat billowed in the spring wind like the wings of the raven on his seal. She did not go down to meet him. Let him seek her out. She was no longer the supplicant. When he finally entered the drawing room where she sat with her embroidery, the Duke appeared altered. There were shadows beneath his eyes, and his customary immaculate appearance showed signs of haste. "Lady Harrow," he began, his voice oddly hesitant. "Your Grace," she replied, not rising from her seat. "I trust London was agreeable. I received your letter, and I yours. Our business appears to be concluded, save for the delivery of your heir." The Duke crossed to the fireplace, one hand gripping the mantel as though for support. "I did not expect—" He paused, seemingly searching for words, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his demeanor. "Your letter suggested you intend to leave Thornfield after the child is born. Is that not the natural conclusion of our arrangement?" Celine placed her embroidery hoop aside. "The contract specified an heir, not a marriage." "And what of the child?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the flames. "What of its mother? The child shall have your name as agreed. As for its mother—" Celine's voice wavered despite her resolve. "I presumed a wet nurse and governess would suffice. My presence would only complicate matters." The Duke turned then, and something in his expression caused Celane's heart to stutter in her breast. Gone was the calculating businessman who had purchased her compliance. In his place stood a man she did not recognize, one whose eyes held a vulnerability that seemed almost indecent in its rawness. "I had not considered," he said slowly, "the possibility that you might not wish to remain." "Wish?" Celine echoed, incredulity coloring her tone. "You speak of wishes, Your Grace, when our entire association has been predicated upon necessity and obligation." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, kneeling before her chair in a gesture so unexpected that Celine could only stare in astonishment. "That night," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "changed more than our circumstances, Lady Harrow." "What do you mean?" she asked, fighting the treacherous hope that threatened to bloom in her chest. "I mean," the Duke replied, taking her hand in his ungloved one, "that I have not slept a full night since I left Thornfield, that London, which has always been my refuge, now seems hollow and meaningless, that I—" The door opened abruptly, admitting Mrs. Winters with the tea service. The housekeeper froze at the threshold, her eyes widening at the sight of the Duke of Ravencrest kneeling before Lady Harrow. "I beg your pardon," she stammered, backing away. "I shall return later." "No," the Duke commanded, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "Leave the tray, Mrs. Winters. Lady Harrow and I have matters of importance to discuss privately." When the door closed behind the housekeeper, a silence descended upon the room, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "You were saying, Your Grace?" Celine prompted, her voice steadier than she felt. The Duke turned back to her, his expression unreadable once more. "I was saying that I would like to propose an amendment to our contract, Lady Harrow." "An amendment," she repeated, disappointment bitter on her tongue. "Of course. More business." "Not business," he corrected, his jaw tight with some emotion she could not name. "Something far more dangerous." The Duke's words hung in the air between them, fraught with meaning Celine dared not interpret. She watched as he retrieved a folded document from his coat pocket, his movements deliberate yet somehow strained. When he handed it to her, their fingers brushed, sending an unbidden current through her veins. "What is this?" she asked, unfolding the parchment with care. "Our contract," he replied, "the original." Indeed it was, the same document she had signed that stormy night, its terms laid out in precise legal language. Her signature stood stark against the creamy paper, a testament to her sacrifice. "I don't understand," Selena said, looking up at him with confusion. "Why show me this now?" The Duke removed his signet ring, the symbol of his authority and lineage, and placed it upon the table beside her. Without it, his hand appeared strangely vulnerable. "Because I wish to destroy it," he answered, his voice low and resolute, "in your presence." A chorus of whispers erupted from the corridor, servants who had gathered like shadows to witness this unprecedented scene. The butler hushed them ineffectually, while a maid's audible gasp punctuated the tension. "Destroy it?" Selina's heart quickened. "On what grounds? I have fulfilled my part." "On the grounds," the Duke interrupted, "that I cannot bear to see you look at me with such contempt for another day." He drew a ragged breath. "On the grounds that what began as a business arrangement has become something I cannot name without fear." Celine rose from her chair, the contract trembling in her grasp. Fear? What could the mighty Duke of Ravencrest possibly fear? That you might leave, he answered simply. That you might take with you not only my heir, but the peace I have found in your presence. The admission, so at odds with the man who had coldly dictated terms mere weeks ago, rendered her momentarily speechless. Outside the window, spring rain began to fall, gentle but insistent, like the truth forcing its way through carefully constructed walls. Your peace, she finally managed. You speak of peace when you have upended my entire existence. I speak of transformation, he countered, stepping closer. I entered into our agreement believing I sought merely an heir, a continuation of my bloodline and legacy. I did not anticipate, he faltered, a crack in his aristocratic composure. I did not anticipate that one night would bind my heart forever. A sharp intake of breath came from beyond the half-closed door. Mrs. Winters murmured something to the gathered staff, and footsteps hastily retreated. Pretty words, Celine said, though her voice wavered. But I have learned to distrust pretty words from powerful men. The Duke nodded, accepting her skepticism as his due. Then, trust actions instead. He reached for the contract in her hands. May I? When she relinquished the document, he crossed to the fireplace and without ceremony cast it into the flames. The parchment curled and blackened, the ink that had sealed her fate disappearing into ash. There, he said, watching the fire consume their agreement. Our contract is void. What does this mean? Celine asked, her hand unconsciously moving to her abdomen where his hair grew. What becomes of me? Of the child? The Duke turned to her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. That depends entirely upon your wishes, Lady Harrow. My wishes, she repeated, the concept foreign after weeks of obligation. And if I wish to leave, then you shall leave with a settlement generous enough to ensure you and your family never know want again. His voice remained steady, though something in his eyes betrayed his struggle. The child would be welcome to visit Thornfield whenever you permitted, and you would never be bound to me in any way. And if I wished to stay? The question escaped her lips before prudence could intercede. The stillness that followed was absolute. Even the rain seemed to pause its rhythm against the window panes. If you wish to stay, the Duke said carefully, each word measured as though it might shatter, I would offer you not a contract, but a covenant. He moved toward her with deliberate slowness. Not an arrangement, but a marriage. Not duty, but devotion. He reached for her hand, and this time she did not withdraw it. I have lived my life believing love was a fiction invented to disguise ambition, he continued, until that night when you looked at me not as the Duke but as a man, and found me wanting. In your disappointment, I glimpsed my own emptiness. The assembly of servants outside the door had grown, their collective breath held in anticipation of Celene's response. The household that had witnessed her humiliation now waited to witness her vindication. How can I trust this change of heart? She asked, though her fingers curled around his. How can I believe that what began as commerce has truly transformed into care? You cannot, he admitted. Not today. Perhaps not tomorrow. But I ask for the chance to prove it through time and constancy. He brought her hand to his lips, his kiss reverent against her skin. I ask for the privilege of earning what I foolishly thought could be purchased. Lady Celine felt tears gather in her eyes, not of sorrow or shame, but of a tentative hope she had not dared entertain. You once spoke of bearing you an heir, she said. What would you have me bear you now? Witness, he answered. Witness to the man I wish to become. Not the Duke of Cold Contracts, but Nathaniel, who woke from a lifetime of winter when you entered his house. For the first time, he had given her his Christian name, a gift more intimate than any physical union. Celine took a step toward him, closing the distance between contract and covenant, between arrangement and affection. Then before these witnesses, she declared, her voice carrying to the servants who no longer pretended not to listen, I shall bear witness to your transformation, Nathaniel, as you shall bear witness to mine. The Duke, Nathaniel, dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. From his waistcoat, he withdrew not another contract, but a ring of hammered gold set with a single pearl. Lady Celine Harrow, he said, his voice clear and carrying, will you honor me with your hand, not in obligation, but in choice, not for an heir, but for a lifetime, not for forgiveness of debt, but for the promise of love. The gathered staff held their collective breath, fans stilled. Even the ancient clock in the hallway seemed to suspend its ticking. Celine looked down at the man before her, not the Duke who had demanded an heir, but the man who now offered his heart. I will, she answered, her voice strengthening with each word. Not for duty, but for the devotion I see dawning in your eyes. Not for debt forgiven, but for love discovered." He slipped the ring upon her finger, then rose to stand before her as an equal. When he leaned forward, their witnesses forgot propriety and broke into spontaneous applause. His lips touched hers with a gentleness that belied their beginning, a kiss of promise rather than possession. "The season shall remember this day," the butler announced from the doorway, his usual formality giving way to sentiment. "The day the Duke of Ravencrest bowed not to tradition, but to love." Nathaniel smiled against Celine's lips, then drew back to look into her eyes. "Let them remember," he murmured, "for I shall never forget." Outside, the spring rain had ceased, and sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the gardens of Thornfield. Where once dead roses had climbed the trellis of the east wing, green shoots now reached tentatively toward the light, a rebirth as profound as the one taking place within. Autumn painted Thornfield's gardens in hues of amber and gold, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the terrace where the Duchess of Ravencrest sat with her needlework. At 5 months, her condition was evident beneath the soft folds of her gown, the heir to Ravencrest growing strong within her womb. Lady Celine, now more often addressed as Your Grace, looked up from her embroidery as footsteps approached along the gravel path. Nathaniel appeared around the corner, his greatcoat discarded in favor of a simple waistcoat, his cravat loosened in the warmth of the October day. "You should be resting," he said, though his tone held no command, only concern. "I find the air invigorating," she replied, setting aside her work to make room for him on the stone bench. "Our child seems to agree. He has been quite active today." Nathaniel placed his hand upon the curve of her abdomen, his touch reverent. "He? You sound quite certain." "Call it a mother's intuition," Celine smiled, covering his hand with her own. "Though I shall love a daughter just as dearly. As shall I." He brought her fingers to his lips. "I find I care less for the heir and more for the mother with each passing day." From the entrance to the garden, Mrs. Winters observed the couple with quiet satisfaction. "Never thought I'd see the day," she murmured to the butler who stood beside her, a tea tray balanced in his hands, the master smiling like a common man in love. "Nothing common about it, Mrs. Winters," the butler replied. "Rare as a winter rose, that kind of transformation." Inside the manor, preparations continued for the dinner party that would introduce the Duchess to society. The town had buzzed with speculation when the Duke had announced his marriage, a swift and private affair that defied convention. Tonight would be their first formal appearance, and servants hurried to ensure every detail reflected the change that had come to Thornfield. As twilight descended, guests began to arrive, their carriages forming a procession up the gravel drive. Among them was Lord Hawthorne, the Duke's uncle and most vocal critic of the match. "Nephew," he greeted coldly as he entered the grand foyer, "I see you've finally decided to emerge from your romantic seclusion." Nathaniel stood at the foot of the staircase, Celine's hand resting in the crook of his arm. "Uncle," he acknowledged with a slight inclination of his head, "may I present my wife, the Duchess of Ravencrest." Lord Hawthorne's eyes narrowed as he assessed Celine, taking in her condition with a curl of his lip. "So, the rumors are true. A convenient arrangement indeed." "If by convenient you mean divinely ordained," Nathaniel replied, his voice carrying throughout the hall where other guests had begun to gather, "then yes, I count myself blessed beyond measure." A murmur ran through the assembled company. The Duke's transformation was evident in his every gesture, the tenderness with which he regarded his wife, the absence of the cold calculation that had once defined him. "Such sentimentality," Lord Hawthorne scoffed. "Your father would be disappointed to see the Ravencrest name attached to such hasty entanglements." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the servants stilled, awaiting the Duke's response to this public insult. Nathaniel's expression remained serene as he addressed not only his uncle, but the entire assembly. "My father valued legacy above all else, it's true, but I have discovered a truth he never embraced, that love, freely given and received, is the most enduring legacy of all." He turned to Celine, his gaze holding hers with an intimacy that made several ladies of the ton raise their fans to hide their expressions. "Before these witnesses," he continued, his voice clear and unwavering, "I declare that what began as a contract has become a covenant. What started as obligation has transformed into devotion." The Duchess's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she recognized his words, the same he had spoken when he proposed true marriage instead of mere arrangement. The silver hairpin that secured her coiffure caught the light, a symbol of her elevation from desperation to dignity. "The first waltz belongs to my wife," Nathaniel announced, leading Celine toward the ballroom where musicians had begun to tune their instruments. "As does my heart." The ton parted to let them pass, whispers following in their wake. Lord Hawthorne remained near the entrance, his disapproval evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. "It won't last," he muttered to a neighboring matron. "Sentiment fades faster than fashion." But as the music began and the Duke led his Duchess in the first dance, the tenderness between them was undeniable. Where once calculation had governed his every move, now grace flowed through him. Where once she had approached him with dread, now she followed his lead with trust, evident in every step. "They said you purchased her," a young debutante whispered to her companion, watching the couple waltz, "that he acquired her to secure an heir." "Perhaps," her friend replied, her gaze soft with romance, "but look at them now. Whatever the beginning, the middle has become something altogether different." As the dance concluded, the Duke bowed to his Duchess with reverence that transcended etiquette. She curtsied in return, her smile illuminating features that had once been drawn with worry. "Let the ton remember," Nathaniel said softly for her ears alone, "the night I publicly acknowledged what my heart had long known, that in seeking an heir, I found instead a queen." Later that evening, when the last guests had departed and Thornfield once again belonged to its master and mistress alone, they stood together in the library where their story had begun. The contract that had bound them lay in ashes, long cold, but on the mantel rested the silver quill that had signed it, preserved not as a reminder of obligation, but as a testament to transformation. "I had a letter from my brother today," Celine said, her head resting against Nathaniel's shoulder as they gazed into the dying embers of the fire. "His health continues to improve. The physician believes he may be strong enough to visit by Christmas." "I shall look forward to welcoming him," Nathaniel replied, his hand tracing gentle patterns along her arm, "to showing him that his sister's sacrifice has yielded not just security, but joy." Celine turned in his embrace, her palm coming to rest against his cheek. "It was not sacrifice that brought us here in the end," she corrected gently. "It was grace, the grace that transforms contract into covenant, arrangement into affection, duty into devotion." The Duke of Ravencrest, once known throughout England for his iron will and cold precision, closed his eyes at her touch, surrendering to the truth of her words. "Then let grace be our legacy," he whispered, "and love our inheritance." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering Thornfield's gardens in a blanket of white. The east wing, where once dead roses had clung to crumbling trellises, now stood restored, its windows warm with light, its future as bright as the promise between the Duke and his Duchess. And if, in years to come, the ton would speak of the transformation of Ravencrest, of how a man of iron learned to kneel and a woman of courage learned to trust, they would date it precisely to the moment when a contract burned and a covenant took its place. For in the annals of noble houses, no legacy proved more enduring than the one written not in blood or gold, but in the language of redemption. The heir that would be born in the spring was but the first chapter of a story far greater than either had imagined when they signed their names to that fateful agreement. For what the Duke had demanded, "Bear me an heir and your debt is forgiven," had yielded something beyond calculation, a love that bound not just bodies, but souls, forever. Thus ends the tale of the Duke who sought an heir but found a heart, and the woman who paid a debt but gained a kingdom. May we all be so fortunate as to discover that what begins in duty may end in devotion, and what starts as transaction may transform into true love. If this story touched your heart, remember that love's greatest power lies in its ability to transform even the coldest contract into the warmest covenant. Leave a comment about a moment when obligation became opportunity in your own life, and subscribe for more tales of redemption, romance, and the remarkable journey from duty to devotion.